Good morning, everybody. My name is Katie Ferguson. I'm the Senior Vice President of Social Impact for DEB-Z Group, leading a lot of our work on gender equality across the group. We are here on the UN-declared International Day of Women and Girls in Science, declared by the UN to celebrate women and girls in STEM fields, science, technology, engineering and maths, and to raise awareness of the continued gender gap in these fields. It's really fitting, I think, that we're here today at the Global Innovation Centre of Element 6, part of the DEB-Z Group, which really leads on cutting-edge research and development in the field of industrial diamonds. So, I'm joined today by a great panel of fantastic role models across STEM. And I think, the reason we're here today to talk about, the continued gap of women in STEM fields is because despite really significant effort globally to encourage more girls and young women to choose STEM as a career to study, still globally only around 30% of female students are choosing to study STEM. And it's even lower when you look at subjects like ICT, maths and statistics, engineering, all really critical fields. And interestingly, even in countries or STEM fields where there is higher undergraduate enrollment, you still see a drop-off after several years of studying or after a few years of being in that early career stage. So it's an interesting pipeline challenge of not only encouraging more girls to study the subjects, but also how do you encourage them to stay in and pursue a STEM career. And I think for me, this is a really even more important time to be talking about this, because as we head into the fourth industrial revolution and the future of work, the future of jobs, is going to be more and more about tech and innovation. If we don't have women choosing these careers, they won't be part of leadership, they won't have that access to future economic opportunity. But there's also an impact for society as well around how do we have a more diverse range of teams and of leaders designing and embedding new technologies, and really understanding the unintended consequences and making sure that new tech really benefits everybody in an inclusive way. So at DEB-Z, we're really passionate about this, and we're passionate about it not only because it's important for the future of our business, it's also important for the future of the communities that we partner with around our operations, and it's important for society as a whole. Women have been underrepresented in the mining industry for a long time. DEB-Z was no exception to that. 2/3 of our roles are technical across the business. So in 2017, we launched a partnership with UN Women, and we made commitments to focusing on increasing the number of women in leadership and technical roles, to partnering on STEM programs with partners like Womenj across Southern Africa and UN Women in Canada, to encourage more young girls to engage and understand the opportunities within STEM, and to really challenge gender stereotypes, not only in technical fields, but also using the power of our marketing to do that as well. So this is a really fitting day, I think, to take stock, to talk about some of the progress that has been made, to talk about some of the systemic challenges that still exist, and maybe to talk about some of the solutions and the way forward. So we've got a great panel of role models here today, and we've actually just been talking about how important role models are in this. So I would like to introduce you all. Firstly, we have got Walter Huhn, and Walter has been the Chief Executive here at Element 6 since March 2013. He's held a really wide number of roles across the telecommunications and information technology industries, including at Fujitsu Computers and Motorola. And Walter, also as part of the DEB-Z Group Exec Committee, you've been instrumental in our He4She partnership with UN Women since 2017. And He4She is really focused on male engagement around gender equality and men being a really active part of the solution to gender equality and seeing that as benefiting everybody. We have also got Dr. Stephanie Liggins, and Stephanie is a principal scientist at Element 6 with only over 10 years' experience in the synthesis of diamond and materials engineering. She completed her PhD in defect identification in synthetic diamond working with DEB-Z and currently leads the R&D team in developing new materials for lightbox jewellery. And in her spare time, she's a guider with Girl Guiding UK, where she's led outreach programs around STEM and has worked at Physics in the Field events with the Institute of Physics. She also contributed to the 2018 WISE, Women in Science and Engineering Amazon Research Project, and is now a WISE role model looking to encourage, motivate and inspire girls and women into STEM subjects. We are also privileged to have Dr. Sheeny Somara. And Sheeny is a mechanical engineer and science reporter, quite an unusual combination, translating complex cutting-edge science into accessible and captivating watchable content. Her recent work includes projects for the BBC, PBS Digital, Sprint Business and Dyson, and she previously hosted Techno for Al Jazeera America, as well as working for Sky, Discovery and the Science Channel. She's a really strong advocate for STEM education, encouraging women and girls in particular to empower themselves by studying these subjects. And we have Aditi Lakman, and Aditi is a civil engineer. She's passionate about affecting positive social change in her industry and beyond. She volunteered with Womend, which is an NGO largely based in Southern Africa, but increasingly global, who we're privileged to partner with across Southern Africa. And Womend are really focused on understanding the pipeline challenges and focused on supporting young women and girls through STEM studying and into early careers. And she's now the lead program coordinator overseeing activities across the whole of sub-Saharan Africa. She's got extensive experience leading the Girlenge project, which I'm sure she will talk a bit about, and works to attract schoolgirls into STEM careers. And she's been awarded the Queen's Young Leaders Award and Unleash Lab Young Talent. So I think you'll agree we've got a really fantastic panel to be talking about this subject today. And I'm going to start with asking you all the same two questions. Why did you choose to study and work in a STEM field, and why does the topic of closing the gap in STEM really matter to you? Walter, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. Well, since I was a little kid, interested in technology, so that was an easy choice. It was always given, so never really questioned that, and really enjoyed it, I have to say. If you look at today's world, it's so much driven by technology. A lot of the really big challenges we have in society today are linked to technology. Hopefully technology is going to help solve them. And linking that to diversity, I mean, it's pretty well understood today that diverse teams achieve much better results and have multiple views that applies to science as to every other topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Stephanie?
So for me, I think I started off in a very STEM type environment. My mum was in computer science, my dad designed and built research labs. So there was that natural affinity with always wanting to know the how, the why, very much dismantling things at a young age to my parents, not always pleasure. And it just progressed from there through school. They were my strongest subjects. And actually, when I went on to my A-levels, I was thinking about doing business and law until my college interviewer suggested that actually looking at where my grades lay and my talents, that perhaps physics and maths and science were a better option. And after that, really, I think it came down to a lot of inspiring people along the way who I had the pleasure to work with. So my teachers, my lecturers at university, and particularly my tutor at Warwick, inspired me, the enthusiasm they had for the subjects they did. And I was proud to be able to say I was doing something like the physics subject that I then chose into. And I think that's probably where it came from. It was that interest in the how and the why things work, the opportunity that technology could provide, as Walter kind of spoke to, about providing next generation capabilities, and then just kind of the excitement of being involved in that type of area.
That's fantastic. Okay, so really, so early start being surrounded by it, but then also having some really sort of inspiring mentors and peers.
Yeah, and
I
think for me it's giving that enthusiasm for the subject to other people and getting them encouraged into it as well, especially if we're underrepresented in the female quota, to try and understand why that gap exists and maybe give someone else the inspiration that I had.
Fantastic, thank you. Sheeny?
I think very similar to Stephanie, I just adore my dad, and he's a mechanical engineer, and I wanted to be just like him when I grew up. And so I followed in his footsteps, studying mechanical engineering with a specialism in building services. And actually, when I was studying towards my degree, doing maths and physics weren't my strongest subjects. I mean, I really actually found them very hard. But I was determined to do what Dad did, and so I put in so much effort to try and get good at those subjects. And then when I was at university, I studied mechanical engineering at bachelor level, and I just fell in love with the subject. I mean, being taught how to unravel the secrets of how this world functions was just mind-blowing to me, you know.
It's like a superpower.
Yeah, like really sort of understanding the sort of secrets and using mathematics to do that. And so I really fell in love with maths and physics and STEM subjects generally, and in particular fluid dynamics, which is what I went on to do as a PhD, looking at how gases and liquids flow. And so that was my journey for the first part of my career. And having studied something so in depth in engineering for about 8 years, I then I loved communicating science more than anything. So when you do your doctorate, you end up going to various conferences and talking to people about your research. And I just loved seeing the light bulbs switch on in people's minds about what we were all doing. And I wanted to just take that to the next level, and television and radio seemed like the best place for that. And then I went off into the science and technology reporting sort of path, and that's where I am today, sort of reporting on innovation around the world. The reason why I'm so passionate about trying to close the gender gap is because through my journey in engineering, I've really experienced a lot of the reasons why women fall out of the pipeline. And I personally find it heartbreaking because there's absolutely no reason why women shouldn't do STEM subjects. And I think, you know, well, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of why that happens probably later in this conversation, but I really wanted to put my energy into changing the things that hold women back in STEM.
Fantastic. I think firstly I've got to say, you say that physics wasn't your strong point and you did a PhD in fluid dynamics, so that's a slight...
I can do it, anyone can do it. It's all about hard work and just focus and following your passion.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think passion is coming up as a theme, and also the importance of early role models as well, right? Parents, teachers, and so on. Definitely some themes. Aditi, how about you?
Yeah, so I'd like to say that I got into engineering by accident. I didn't know what it was about, and I recall 10 years ago when I was getting into studying something when I was finishing school and going into university or tertiary education, I had to come up with this big idea of what am I going to do for the rest of my life. And I remembered when I was 5 years old, and my teacher asked me, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I remember saying an artist, right? But then realizing, artists can't make money quick. And at that time, the word engineering was trending. And I thought, I do like maths and science, and I'm really good at technical drawing at school, so why not? Let me try that. And why civil was, my dad was in construction at the time, and so I grew up on a quarry site and a construction site, and that's kind of what I knew. So all these ideas and thoughts I like, okay, let's just do civil engineering. And I think when I got into university, then I realized, oh, is this what it really is? And it so happens that I started becoming passionate about it, but I guess it was me making up this idea in my head of what engineering was at the time. And I think that drove me towards the passion of creating more education for younger people around what is actually engineering. People think of mechanical engineers as those that just fix cars, right? And so for me, that's where the passion grew and where I joined WomEng. In its early days, we were a student-run organization, a passionate bunch of students wanting to make change. And being in a room of 500 students and literally picking out the 1 or 2 women that sat in the room as students for me and our co-founders. We all passionate about changing the dynamic, and I think it leads on to the why are we passionate about closing the gap. And when I look at being in engineering and the importance of design in this world, right, is that design is how we use everyday tools, whether you're an engineer or not. It's for the everyday person. And when I look at the way the world's designed, it hasn't really been designed well for women as well, right? And it's the way, example, power tools. People assume power tools can only be used by men because you have to have muscle for it. Why wasn't the tools designed so that women's fingers could wrap around it? Earlier they discovered that why more women are dying in car crash accidents is because the dummy for the last 100 years has been a man versus a woman figure. And when they changed the figure up, probably 5 years ago, they realized that you have to design the car differently for a woman. And I think seeing that gap and understanding that the world needs diversity and the people who design the products for people in the world needs to be just as diverse.
I think that's such a great example, the dummy in the car one, because that seems so obvious, once it's out. But if you have a design team who's only, seeing it from one perspective, then that's what happens. So it's a great example. So thank you all for sharing that. I think another shared theme is the passion to educate and raise awareness around the topics, and that there needs to be more information out there. And Aditi, if I can stay with you for a minute, we've talked about this, the gender gap in STEM. It has often been described as a pipeline challenge. I hear that a lot. And WomEng really has therefore taken a pipeline approach to the solution. From your experience now across many countries, working with high school girls and undergraduates, what would be your advice on the most effective ways to encourage young girls to be interested in following STEM careers?
Many ways, but I think if I had to sum it up into 3 key places or ways in which we can, at different spheres of influence, affect it. I think working with almost more than 10,000 girls directly over the years, I've seen that an immediate effect is encourage play, especially for girls. Boys are brought up to go and destroy and build and make and destroy. And girls, as they grow up and become teenagers, you need to be prim and proper. You need to sit so that your dress doesn't ride up. You need to look a certain way. And so girls are not being trained to be okay with breaking stuff. And that's essentially what engineering is, right? A science is. It's being okay with failing and trying again. So I think as a parent, as a brother, as a sister, as anyone, is encourage more play. Secondly, I think as individuals within the sector of science and tech and engineering, is for women to be more active role models. Is for us at WomEng, we talk about owning who you are, right? Engineering science has been considered very technical fields, and yes, there are technical components, but it's not just technical that creates those products or the technical products. It's the reasoning, it's empathy. It's showing that you don't have to have one figure that looks like an engineer, right? And so for women, it's about owning who you are, whether you're feminine or whether you like being the geeky looking stereotype. It's own whichever stereotype you are. And for men, it's to be our champions. I think we've mentioned that, right? Is for too long we've had where men typically say, oh, let's leave that to the woman. Oh, it's a woman. We've had where it's a woman in engineering event, so clearly I'm not invited. For us, it's about bringing men to the table as well, right? Is men are still sitting up in CEO levels, and if you're not championing us, then how can we create change? And that's why I love the fact that we have men at the table now. And then on a bigger scale, it's around the marketing of what science and tech and engineering is, and mathematics is. We often talk about it in a technical aspect. And yes, there's a big component around technical, and that plays up on what traits men and women have in the workplace. When we talk about equality, many people mistake it as we all have the same traits, and feminine traits are considered emotional, empathetic, more reasoning, and men are considered they just know how to get work done, right? And so when we market engineering and science and tech as more than just getting things done, but understanding the reasoning behind it, understanding emotions and people, it brings in the feminine factors that are needed in the engineering. So it's around marketing and changing the narrative on what this sector is about. So yeah, I think that's kind of the three ways.
Yeah, fantastic. And my favorite quote so far is engineering is basically breaking stuff.
Yeah.
That's great. We're keeping that one. I love all of those ways. And on the own who you are, I think that is really, really important. And I was really privileged to be with you recently at one of the Girl Eng workshops that you ran near one of our mining operations in Botswana. And I love there was an activity that you do with the girls, which is they get given this, pink hard hat and a pack of creative pipe cleaners and, sequins and stickers and SDG stickers. And they get asked to go away and use their hard hat to tell a story about what are their core values, what is the problem in the world that they want to solve, and what is their USP that they're going to bring to solving that problem. And they volunteer to come up, some of them at the end, and say, this is my hat, and this is what this says about me. And it's so powerful to see these sort of 13, 14, 15-year-olds standing up and, confidently saying, this is me, this is the problem I want to solve, this is what makes me different. And I think that's so important, just to really challenge some of those stereotypes about what an engineer is and what it can be. So Stephanie, you have clearly had a really interesting career so far, and you're clearly really passionate about paying that forward as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the sort of highlights and the challenges, of the journey towards becoming a principal scientist?
Yep.
And what would be your advice for young women, coming into early careers in STEM? In sort of, maximising those opportunities and those highlights, but also maybe, dealing with some of those challenges.
Yeah, sure. I think for me, the highlights, especially of kind of working here, it's I think like you were touching on here, it's about you as an individual, but it's also about the team you can create with the people you work with. And I think we're quite privileged working here at Element 6 with the diversity of people we've got in terms of both skills and backgrounds and knowledge bases, that it means you have a very rounded team. Science engineers, whether it be men or women, technicians, everything coming together is what makes this team work and deliver. And the real highlight of working here is being able to work with such an extreme material with very clever people, and those groups of people allowing us to deliver. We go to our customer who has a technological challenge that they don't really understand how they can solve it, and they can come to us and we can unpick that and then engineer specific properties in a super material to be able to deliver to that. And it's just that exciting journey.
That is very cool,
yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
And I've been incredibly lucky, I think, with the opportunities I've had. It's been probably quite fast-paced, I think, in my development as a scientist, that pretty much from month 2, I got thrown in as technical lead on working with one of our customers to develop the Tweeterdome. So a very kind of consumer understood but commercial project. So I'm doing cutting edge R&D research in a commercial environment that's got a consumer and commercial impact. And I'm the technical lead on it. And so that was quite an exciting opportunity. Where the challenges start to come up is when you're walking into those management and technical type reviews with quite senior people in the room, and as quite a junior person, I'm the technical expert. And it's having, for me, the challenges have been around building my confidence and my identity to deliver that. And going in and learning almost how to be heard in that type of environment and that type of room. And I have been in instances where I am not noticed, if that makes sense. You're the technical lead having a technical discussion and you're not noticed, and that's quite hard work to deal with. But then it's about how do you grow from that and how do you get stronger. And I think what I've been able to get from my training here and talking with other people and role models, etc., is learning that that's not right or wrong. People are different and you need to work and engage with that, whether it's men and women or whether it's senior and junior or technical and non-technical. It's getting the language right and being able to pitch and talk to that aspect of a person that you can then engage with, and then building that relationship together so that the understanding's there and the knowledge is there and you're talking a common language again. And I think that what then makes the playing field a bit more level. So for me, that's kind of both the exciting, the highlight and the opportunity, but it's also been the big challenge for me getting to where I am now. But yeah, it's been an amazing opportunity, and I've had 2 very exciting projects that I've been able to lead. So
Well, your passion is palpable, it's contagious, which is great, thank you. I'm interested in the concept of learning how to be heard, because I think that's probably a really common theme across women in a lot of industries. In terms of, there's probably one sort of paradigm of leadership, historically, in terms of that sort of alpha male dominating a room type leadership.
Yeah.
And I think what we're seeing now is really that changing and people understanding the importance of different types of leadership and a combination of different traits. But I think that concept of learning how to be heard is really important. Did you have any sort of how did you seek out support on that? Did you have mentors or?
Yeah, so I'd agree with your comment kind of there. There is an aspect of generational levels, I think, to this. I think for me it was first of all saying I'm not doing anything wrong, it's just a skill I need to learn and develop. And I think part of the kind of management learning skills, project leadership skills, brought that in. So we did quite a lot on strength deployment indexing and enneagrams and understanding that people are different.
I have no idea what that means, but just keep,
It's about understanding what characteristics you have. Are you a peacemaker? Are you a helper?
Okay.
Are you an investigator? And putting aside the kind of stereotypes that one is right and one is wrong for any particular role, and understanding that I actually need a mix of all of those types of skills and bases and cores to form a good team. So there are training courses. For me, I did reading about it. I mean, I spoke to people like Siobhan here, and one of our executive directors is very supportive about engaging in those types of conversations. And again, talking to both male and female staff that I worked with, it's sharing that relationship and experience, and them saying, oh yeah, I've had a similar problem and I went down this route and this has helped me understand it a lot more. Because there's loads of literature out there and there's loads of people's experiences to draw upon, but it's making sure that they're available and you can engage with them and learn from them. So I think role modelling, mentoring, reciprocal mentoring that DEB-Z is working on at the moment, I think are all key parts for senior people to understand the position of junior people, juniors to understand the positions in seniors, and just get that conversation working and moving for everyone.
That's fantastic, and just that opportunity, those sort of shared spaces to be able to share the different perspectives. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. So Sheeny, I think we're talking, starting to get into the culture aspect of this as well. And one thing I didn't say in your bio is that you also, on top of everything else you're doing, and I don't know how you're doing this, host a podcast called Silence, spelt SCI, Lence, where you interview women working across a whole range of STEM fields who are quite senior in their, or you know, I think a range of stages, but mostly quite senior, and they're interviewed anonymously. And the idea being that it's a space to really be very, very honest about their experiences and share some of those learnings and insights. And I've listened to a few now, I absolutely love them. And I think the thing that really is fantastic is that honesty and the level of honesty that you might not get in a more sort of formal interview situation. And at DEB-Z, you know, we're working really hard towards increasing the number of women across the workforce, but particularly in leadership and technical roles. And a question that we often get asked is, how are we going to have more women in technical roles when that pipeline of women in doesn't exist? So I'm interested in, from your experiences of both working with women in science, but also talking to women in science, what would your response be to that? I mean, are those women out there? And, you know, if they are, how do we encourage them to want to come in and to stay?
Well, I think first of all, I'm surrounded by absolute greatness, and I just feel, I'm just like goosebumps at, you know, being able to identify what the issues are and articulate them, because I think that has been the problem, and that is why I was inspired to start Silence as a podcast, because we need to be able to voice what we've been going through in an honest and an open way. And as a result of having these very frank discussions with women who are both at the start of their STEM career and very senior, it's been astounding how everyone not suffers, but everyone's going through the same kind of challenges. And if I was to boil it down, it would be that it's really about how we view ourselves as women in STEM. And often it's not our fault that we are perfectionists and we're scared to fail, we're scared to play. We've been trained that way. It's the way we've been raised. That, you know, it's that classic example of women and men going for the same job description. Men seeing that they satisfy 4 out of 10 characteristics or requirements and saying, yeah, I'll go for the job, I'll get it. And women saying, you know, I've got 4 out of 10 of the requirements, there's absolutely no way I should apply.
Or even I've got 9 out of 10.
Exactly.
I'm not going to apply.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it's kind of like this perfectionistic mentality. We don't want to get things wrong. We want to do our best, and we're so overly critical and pedantic about the way we come across, and that often makes us silent. Because, you know, I've had young students tell me that in their maths class, if they're one of few girls, they're scared to put their hand up when they know the right answer, because just in case they're wrong. And it's about, first of all, I feel like a start to changing that is to get women to just speak their minds and feel safe to voice their opinions. Because even today, I feel often that I'm a bit nervous to give my honest opinion because it may be shot down, and that has to change. And I feel...
Do you think that part of that is when you are operating in an often male-dominated, and I just mean more men in the environment, there's less latitude for minorities within that environment to make mistakes? I think research sort of shows that you'll be more sort of punished for making a mistake if you are not sort of part of the majority, which isn't going to encourage, you know.
Women on my podcast have often described themselves as being the mascot, you know, because they are one of so few as a minority, whether it's because they're female or ethnic minority or whatever the case may be. They become the mascot, and so there's so much pressure to represent, and that often keeps them mute, because they don't want to not just come across badly for themselves, but for whoever they're representing, and it's a huge amount of pressure to have. And so I think culture needs to change in the sense that we need to be more open to that diverse kind of range of opinions and perspectives. I mean, companies are all talking about diversity and inclusivity because they know that it's going to enhance their teams, but yet we need to go back to basics and actually say it's okay to voice your opinion and make it safe for people to do that. And one of the reasons why I love the fact that we have a male on our panel is that it's not necessarily women that need to change. I think women want to be strong. They want to have that self-belief and confidence and self-esteem in the workplace. And they're often limited in doing that because of male or the majority attitude that is not letting them have that space to just be themselves. And so, you know, it is a lot of cultural change. It's not going to be easy, but I must say that given all the statistics that we know about 30% of women in STEM and et cetera, it's never been so good. We are at a time where we are able to put our voices out there, whether it's on social media or otherwise. And so, you know, the future is hopeful, and it takes events like this to say, yes, we're providing platforms to voice our opinions, and we've just got to keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great, a really important point, you know, about the progress that is being made. But I think, Walter, this is clearly, it's a really complex topic. And I think, you know, all the work that we've been doing, we're really learning that it does require continued focus. You know, it's not just about doing X, Y, Z, and then, you know, suddenly it's addressed. So I'm wondering, you know, given the position where you sit, how do you think we can really make this topic resonate and stay front of mind at both an executive and a board level within companies? And what do you see as the role of male leaders in this? You know, I think that's come up a couple of times. So what's your perspective on that?
Well, first of all, I don't think you should limit it to board and exco level. But as I said in my introduction, it's everybody understands these days that diversity is just a necessity, right? So I would find it hard to believe that people are pushing back on it. It's just sort of, how do you make it work the best possible way? And I think if you only start thinking about women in STEM once they're in a company, then it's sort of very, very late already. So one of the things that is absolutely key, and we're sort of doing a lot, and Stephanie is involved in that, and some of her colleagues as well, reaching out to schools. So starting a lot earlier. There's limits to how much we can do with families at the very early age, which also has an impact already, but making sure that there's more interest and more explanation about what does it mean. Because the education is one thing, but as we heard earlier, of course it's really relevant, what do I do with my education afterwards, right? And then for me, one key aspect is there still is a lot of, and that's what we sort of get as a feedback from these school activities, for example, is still a lot of girls think that you end up being nerdy and stuff like that, right? Or that you're being seen as being overly nerdy. So addressing these challenges, these limitations by, talking about leaders, whether they're female or male, I think makes no difference, to be honest. Talking about role models, yes, but for me, the strongest argument is really talking about today's world. Talk about today's world, talk about the mega trends, talking about the most important issues that need fixing, like environmental and so on and so forth. Sustainability, it's all the obvious ones. So talking about these challenges and making it clear how we as a company, but how generally, you know, they need addressing and which role you can play. What does it mean, you know, as a scientist, as a technical individual, you know, female or male, to work in these fields. Yeah. For me, for us in E6, that is key. That's why we're starting to reach out early, but also talk a lot about the people we have, the females we have in the organization. Let's say, actually, we do it slightly different. We don't limit it to gender diversity. We talk about diversity generally and then narrow it down a little more. So, but that's one of the sort of good things in E6. If you just look at this building, we have around 30 languages spoken in an entity of just a bit more than 150 people. So there's credibility to us talking about diversity, right? And just combining these two and saying, okay, diversity is normal for us, we think it's great, come up with a few examples and saying this is how it actually has helped us, not being too theoretical about it. And then again, these are the big challenges. They need creativity. I think that's key, not just nerdiness and being a specialist in something. Really, it's creative because diversity is a complex topic, as you said, but these challenges are very complex. So, presenting them that way to make them interesting.
And how have you, on that, because you've clearly, listening to Stephanie talk, you've clearly done something here which is quite special in terms of a culture where people really feel that they can bring their diverse perspectives to the table. And like you say, that's not just gender. You've got 30 different languages, people from different countries, different specialisms, so on. Yeah. What do you think, what would be your advice to leaders aiming to create that kind of inclusive culture where really everyone can bring their full potential, in?
Well, difficult to give guidance to others, but sort of what has really worked well in E6, I hope at least, is listen. It's very often the case, isn't it? So it's listen more, and that is listen in meetings. Make sure that when you have younger people or any kind of minority, be aware of the fact that they might sort of find it stressful. So to start all these meetings, project reviews, whatever, with trying to not make it that stressful, but just listening more. Be structured about the meeting so it's easier to sort of start it. Because once that's been our experience. Once you've brought it to a technical, a structured discussion, then it's a lot easier. It's just this sort of initial step that sometimes feels a bit more difficult. So give a lot of structure and just listen.
That takes some self-awareness as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you. And I think your other point around, a link to Aditi's around STEM may have had a marketing problem traditionally, right? Because actually it's about what problems need fixing. What do you want to solve? And there's such, actually there's a lot of creativity in it, whereas maybe historically girls would have thought of it as a very sort of, sort of structured, but actually there's, you need to bring a lot of creativity. Absolutely, absolutely.
And that's where maybe that's also one aspect that made it a little bit easier for E6 is diamond as a technical material is so cool, and you can talk about it in a cool way, and that's what our colleagues do when they go to schools, right?
Yeah.
It's easier than talking about more abstract science fields, right? So maybe that's one of the reasons why it has actually worked reasonably well.
But yes, but it's what you focus on as well, is how do you make even the more abstract fields relatable and interesting and engaging.
I think with subjects like maths and physics, for example, they're so intimidating that, first of all, girls feel like it's too scary to even focus on those subjects. But I think girls get stuck there, because you were talking about the pipeline earlier on. Girls get stuck at that point where it's about the maths and the physics and the scariness of studying it in schools. But actually, we need to market the bigger, the wider perspective, which is that by studying those scary subjects, you could actually be in the running for solving global problems. I mean, engineers solve massive global problems that sort of can change the quality of our lives, and that's what's exciting. And you don't necessarily need to have maths and physics. There are so many routes into STEM subjects. Apprenticeships are brilliant, and creativity is so essential for engineering. You've got to be able to think out the box. You're a problem solver, essentially.
Yeah. That's. I think it's really interesting the maybe slight fear around STEM subjects. I saw a study recently that was looking across the PISA scores across 64 countries, and it had actually identified that there was very little difference in STEM in science and math scores between girls and boys, but actually there was a measurable difference between boys and girls in reading scores, with boys being, girls being measurably higher on reading. And it actually pointed to the fact that maybe something that hasn't been considered is more boys needing to be encouraged with reading and humanities as well as part of this, balancing out across the STEM fields. And so I think it's just another indicator of looking at it as a gender challenge and focusing, on men and boys as well as part of this challenge, in terms of, because it is so complicated and interrelated. So yeah, interesting. We're going to go for some questions now. Is that okay?
Sure.
Yeah. If anybody in the room would like to ask a question, please let us know. We've got a few here from Facebook. So I think, Walter, can I ask you this first one? And I think this is one that probably, you know, there are big debates around this, but is positive discrimination inevitable to some degree when you're trying to balance the scales and trying to balance a historic gap? What do you think?
I think it is inevitable, but I don't think it's a problem.
Okay.
Because I mean, when you think about hiring processes, right? There's always a certain percentage where you just get it wrong. That's normal, whether it's about gender diversity, or just, you know, technical skills, whatever. So that's a given, right? But if you just think about, it's not going to work for everybody. People need to get used to working in that field. People need to get used to a good ratio, a fair balance of gender. So you know, it's just a normal pendulum effect. I think it is inevitable, but I don't think it is a problem.
You think it is inevitable?
I think it is inevitable that you have a little bit of an overswing. But as I said, I don't think it is a problem.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Do you think that sometimes what might be seen as positive discrimination could actually be just hiring managers thinking differently about who might actually be good at doing the job and bringing something new to that role? Because I think, you know, as humans, we've all got our unconscious biases, and people we've seen succeed in a role before, we tend to think we need to put that same profile of person in again, whereas actually we could challenge ourselves to think a bit more creatively about what somebody with different experiences and perspectives might bring to that same role.
Yeah, absolutely. But as I said, it's. I think we're a million miles away from positive discrimination so far. That's why I'm not so concerned. It's just about making sure that we, a bit like you said, that in interviews, you know, we just make sure we talk to enough females. If your starting point is too low, right, then it's never going to work, right? So rather invite more. And you mentioned hiring managers. That is a very interesting topic, actually, as well. Making sure you get enough on the panel, but also think about the panels you use, right? If it's the traditional panels, actually dominated by senior people, male people, you know, the outcome is very easy to predict. So not just start on the hiring side, but also on the interviewing side, I think is quite relevant.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. I think, I mean, this is probably one that people are, you know, thinking about as well. Sheeny, you mentioned the progress that's being made. I think the question here is, you know, is it a sad reflection that after decades we're still talking about STEM and the visibility of women in science in 2020? What do you think?
Well, a sad reflection, I think, is... I wouldn't describe it as a sad reflection. I think it's great that we're talking about women in STEM. I also think we're in an era where talking about gender is becoming a bit untrendy. When I talk to the women on my podcast, they are over it. You know, it's not about men, women, all of that. It's about, I want to be recognised for what I'm bringing to the table. Women have got that strong today. And I've often heard women talk about, you know, I don't want to hear about quotas. I've got to this position of where I'm at through sheer merit. And so, I don't know, is it a sad reflection that after decades we're still talking about women and the visibility of women in science? I think it's great that we're talking about it because we have, you know, women have been making changes, particularly in science, for a long, long time. It's just we haven't been focusing on their stories. When you go through history books, we're hearing a lot about what men did and their journey, and women were doing the same. It wasn't being written down.
Absolutely,
it wasn't being recorded. So I'm glad we're talking about it. It's fantastic, but it's not a problem of that women aren't capable. Women don't want to be in science. It's about bringing those voices, turning the volume up in their voices and letting us see them.
such an important point, I think, is really making those role models and stories really visible. My daughter's favourite book at the moment is Rebel Girls, and that's fantastic. That's trying to do exactly that, right? The women in history. And we're trying to do the same at DEB-Z. We're really give a lot more visibility and profile to women, particularly in leadership and technical roles across the business, because what we found when we talked to women across the business is they said we just don't see them, so that I think really does make a huge difference.
And maybe for me to add to it as well, we often get that as well. Oh, isn't it a sad issue that we're still talking about women now and that nothing has changed? What I say that we do at Women's is generational, is this issue around women in the workplace hasn't come across overnight, and it wouldn't be solved overnight. For me, and this is from a personal mission as well, is that my job here is not to make the workplace or the environment 50-50 by the time I die, right? But my job is to know that when I die or when I retire from doing this, is that I've left the place a little better for the next generation to do more. And that's how we need to see it. It's not something that will get solved overnight, but if we don't keep pushing on that agenda, it wouldn't get any more progress. And so it's about us talking more comfortably. And you look 10 years before, it's getting a bit tiring now, but it's actually a good thing, right? Maybe it is, we start talking more about the individual and not just the gender aspect of it. And so I think when people don't see major changes, they forget to see it over generations versus just seeing it in a small capsule. And culture changes over generations. It doesn't change over decades even. And I think that's what sometimes people are naive about, the change that comes in this kind of discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
I must add that I've been running my podcast for 2 years, and when I first started it, the reason why I made it anonymous is because a few women said there's no way I'm talking about my experiences with people knowing who I am. And 2 years later, I've got women saying, I don't mind people knowing who I am. That's
great.
That's the change that we're going through.
Change. Yeah, that's great. I know we've got a question in the room here.
Yes, so Shidi touched on it just briefly there, around quotas. So as a global business, I know it's acceptable in some countries to set specific quotas around gender. So you could hit a target of 50% men, 50% women. From a hiring perspective, is there any advice that as a business we're kind of putting in there so that people aren't making their decisions primarily based on gender, but instead on the skill sets that are being put in front of them? I don't know who's best to answer that.
Yeah, do you want to answer?
I mean, I've just run through a round of recruiting for new scientists in my team anyway, so I've kind of got a little bit of local or recent knowledge. I think it also ties back a little bit about this positive discrimination aspect. And for me, when I go out and review CVs, as far as is practically possible, I try and remove any of that bias in there. And what I want to do is have a scope of the type of person I want, and I'm looking for skills that marry against that. I don't look at, I need to have an extra woman in my team because X, Y, and Z. I'm looking at this person's got the basic skills that I need. They've got the personality profile that will fit well with the team, and they can bring something different. I don't mind where they come from. I don't mind who they are. Obviously, their technical background has an influence, but it's about the right person for the right role. It's not about trying to fix this quota of getting 50% men or 50% women or getting over this 33% mark. And I think from a positive discrimination, if you are want to go down that route, it's got to work both ways. It's got to work as much for opportunities for men in areas that they're less represented in, as well as for areas where women are less represented. And it's having the conversation and just saying, these are the opportunities. It's up to you if you want to take them or not. But giving everyone the same exposure to all of those opportunities and getting the right person for the right role.
Yeah, the right role and the right team.
And the right team, yeah. And building that team as a whole.
Yeah, maybe just one comment on that one. Quota is always a tricky one. Quota are always a tricky one because they can be positively and negatively discriminating. However, to a certain degree you need them because you always need a target. As Stephanie says, at the end of the day, it's always about hiring the best possible person as an organization. But unless you have at least a target that you've well communicated, that is well understood, it's not going to take decades, it's going to take centuries until you get a balance. So that's kind of
Yeah,
let's always
that's the
take quotas,
nuance between
exactly.
quotas and
Let's always
targets.
take them with a little bit of a pinch of salt. But I don't think there is a way without quotas, just as a target, to remind everybody of, okay, eventually we want to get there.
Yeah.
And unless there's a little bit of pressure, that's just, you know, how humans
Yeah,
work,
yeah.
you're not going to get there.
And I think that's how businesses work. So I think for me, the positive thing about targets versus quotas, as you've just said, is that it shows that this is really business critical, and we're going to have targets like we would for any other area of business, you know, and we will measure against that, because otherwise we won't know if we are making progress. And it doesn't mean there won't be reasons why we don't hit certain targets, but then that helps us to understand and unpack those reasons and those additional barriers. And it's a continuous feedback of learning and helping to address those barriers, and not just around gender, I think around all aspects of diversity. So yeah, so that was one of the questions from Facebook as well. I think, Stephanie, there's a question here around, is there a wider issue with attracting young people of all genders into STEM? What do you think?
Young people of all genders into STEM. Yeah, I mean, I think the stats kind of say quite a lot, don't they? That when you're going through high school, you've got to do certain subjects, and then the minute you get from almost GCSE to A-level, there's a huge drop-off of seeing women carrying around into that. So yeah, I think that is something that needs to be understood, and it's not just, right, we've got to force more women through on this pipeline. It's, why aren't you interested? What's stopping you? Is it the physics is scary, maths is scary? How do we break that down, and how do we make it more accessible and exciting for young people of all genders? And there's huge diversity to what gender actually means as well now. So how does that reflect in this mix and understanding of how we need to take this forward? And I think for me, a lot of it is about how do we get the exposure out there. I mean, when I was growing up and in school, I didn't actually know what an engineer was. I mean, I was late 90s going through high school, engineering wasn't even on my radar as a concept. It's like maths, physics, chemistry, biology. That's what science is about. Or technology kind of came in a little bit in A-levels, but really I think, what is it? And how do we get people to understand that? And how do we make the opportunities there to say, this is the socio impact you can have on there. This is why it's got real world influence. And the young people are the people of our future. So they're going to be making the next step technological developments. They're going to be driving Industry 4.0. And they're coming through now.
Yeah.
So what is the engagement we need to do to break down those barriers that's stopping them from continuing?
Yeah, fantastic. So important to have them at the table.
Yeah.
Katie, I was going to add there as well, is that, again, it comes down to culture and narrative, right? Is that traditionally we think of engineering and tech as the specific sector that we have to get a pipeline of people into. And at Women's, this is how we evolve our thinking as well, is initially people think, oh, we come into Women's, it's for engineers that are women, right? But as the industry grows and as the everyday things that we use, is there's some bit of tech and engineering infused into it. And so how do we change that narrative is around talking about how do we use the engineering and tech as skills and not just talking about it as a profession, so that, as you said, you don't have to be doing pure mathematics and pure science, and you don't have to go and now get a 4-year degree to say, oh, I'm in engineering, right? Yeah. But it's equipping, and that's what we do at Women's now, is equip example founders who are in the tech and engineering space with those skills so that they can go out and now make a career of it, right? So it's no more just, oh, you're an engineer. It's how do we equip the global population with engineering and tech skills.
Can I just add to that? I mean,
Really quickly.
Yep. It was the transition that got me from the business and law into doing physics and science, because it was the analytical skills and the way of thinking it taught me, not the core physics, but the how to approach problems and problem solving. And I think that is a really key message that should be carried through more strongly.
I think this has just been such a fantastic discussion. We have 1 minute left, so I'm going to ask each of you to give one example of, Walter, what do you think leaders should be doing to close this gap?
Very clearly, just repeating what I said earlier, it's really, really important to not pitch the technical aspect. It's about pitching the creativity required to solve the world's big problems.
Great, thank you. Stephanie, what do you think women early STEM careers should be doing?
Role models and enablers. getting the communication and the story going.
That's fantastic. Sheely, what do you think companies should be doing?
Allowing more flexibility and trust of people with the skills to just come and deliver and perform at work.
Fantastic. And Aditi, what do you think schools and parents and that whole community ecosystem?
I think the most important thing is building confidence and across the board from men and women, girls and boys, is build confidence to own who you are and your individuality.
And play more.
And play more.
Play more, break stuff.
Break stuff.
Afraid to fail.
Yeah.
Because
Don't be
engineering
afraid to
is
fail.
built on failure. So.
Yeah.
That's great. It's not failing, it's learning.
Exactly.
Brilliant, fantastic. Thank you so much to all of you. It's been a really, really good discussion. Thanks. Hopefully we're here next year and even more progress has been made. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.